Okay, hi, Reverend Mark here. If you see me looking down on the videotape for YouTube, I am live streaming on Kick right now as well. Hi, Reverend Mark here with the caller on tonight. I was hoping to talk about resiliency. As we sit here right now, I'm just seeing how things go with the live stream. Hope you're all doing well. Okay, when it comes to the ideas and aspects of resiliency, how well do you bounce back in life? To me, resiliency isn't about recovery. Recovery is a process found in resiliency, sure. But right at that instant where you need to bounce back, how do you operate? How do you maintain? How do you go about doing things? Well, in my discussion in my college course this week, we were talking about it, and I was talking about something I developed called ICRI, I cry, Immediate Critical Resiliency Inquiry. Now, this may sound funny. I cry. Crying may be part of your way of resiliency and bouncing back. Um, I looked at it, and there's some great work on resiliency by Dr. Block. Now, Dr. Block talks about ego resilience and ego control. As different things go on, and you have a control or maintain a balance in your emotional response, there's definitely a scale that goes with it. But to me, the scale would take almost forever. It's like 14 questions, 1 through 4. And to me, that's not something you do in a moment where things just hit you hard. So I was sitting there thinking, what aspects really would go into an initial critical response using resiliency? And I realized, if nothing else, if I could pose a few simple questions and take it from the mentality of we were 12. Now, I say this because we have an immortal aspect when we start thinking about being 12. We have a concept of death, but we're young enough that we really don't see it creeping up on us. So when we get into different tight spots, our first instinct is this is dangerous. We might die. It's like, wow. So using that concept of asking 12-year-old self as we go through different portions where we need a resiliency check, I think this works. The first part is the immediate critical response inquiry. Is going to the physical aspects. Now, the first one I like to ask everybody when you're in a crisis event or an event where you need resiliency, the physical aspects are pretty simple. Number one, can you breathe? Literally, I mean, can you breathe? Simple as that. And if you can, then breathe. If you can't breathe, you're in a really critical situation, get help. Okay, so we've got breathing covered. From a 12-year-old viewpoint, breathing is absolutely cool. I want to breathe as a 12-year-old. So then we go into the critical response question of, are you bleeding? Well, no. Okay, we can move on then. If you are bleeding, how bad would your 12-year-old self see you bleeding? Run to the hospital, need stitches, or mama kiss your boo-boo? Right? So once we have those physical aspects done and we're looking at it, it's we go into the critical aspects and looking at the physical spot. Lost my thought. Hey, how about that? And I'm not going to cut out these things when I lose a thread of thought. So we got, are you bleeding? Are you breathing? Can you move? Can you move? If you can move and you're not pinned down, then you have that ability of 12-year-old fight or flight. Now, that's important because as you look at it, if you can move, you can get out of any situation and come back and address it later. If you can't move, for some reason you're stuck there, you're waiting for somebody to show up or deal with the situation, help you deal with the situation. Sometimes you can't always just pick up and leave. camera's slipping. How about that? So, okay, we have the physical aspects covered, and you address it from your 12-year-old point of view. Are you breathing? Are you bleeding? Can you move? Well, then we can move on to the mental aspects. And the first one I like to think of is in resiliency when you're looking at it. Are you afraid your parents are going to find out? Now, to me, that means when you go into the aspect and you're looking at it, dang, my parents found out well, that's usually a clue if you're in a situation or event and it's a crisis. Call somebody, let somebody know. After the fact, if you think somebody would be upset that you didn't call and you didn't advise them, married couples know this one. Something happens, probably better call your significant other. If they find out later on down the road you were in a critical event and you didn't tell them, it might be, really? You didn't think I needed to know that? What made you think I didn't need to know that? No, so the aspect of, would you be afraid if your parents found out? That means you need to contact somebody and deal with it. You can't sit there and go through crisis sometimes without help. And help is important, and learning how to do that and ask for help and knowing when to need to ask for help is part of critical response of resiliency. Okay, so here we go. Let's go into the next aspect. How long does your 12-year-old think it's going to take to bounce out of this? Now, 12-year-olds are notorious. They will do work if there's a benefit to them to go ahead and do that work. But generally, they're lazy enough. They're 12. They're not expected to do much. So how much work would your 12-year-old self be willing to do to resolve and be resilient in this situation? I think that's a good and fair question. So we have the parent aspect. We need to call, we need to talk to somebody. We have the aspect of how long does it think your 12-year-old self would say to resolve the situation? Okay, and the third point. And here we go. Another mind block here again. When we're looking at these aspects, we need to remember that immediate response helps us bounce back later. If we gather our thoughts and move forward in a critical aspect, then we don't have to do it later down the road. We may want to panic, we may want to go cry. That was the other point in the mental aspect. Would your 12-year-old self want to cry? Are you in such a situation that you need to stop and cry? Now, sometimes that's a stress relief, sometimes it's out of anger. There's different reasons you want to cry. Even if you don't cry, you're just acknowledging the fact that something is so stressful you could cry goes towards the aspect of bouncing back and resiliency. So, would your 12-year-old self want to call your parents, let somebody know? Are they afraid that their parents would find out? The aspect of the lazy 12-year-old, how much work are you willing to put in to resolve the situation? How long do you think it's going to take? And then the simple aspect of, do you feel like you want to cry? So put that together with the physical aspects. Are you breathing? Are you bleeding? Can you move? Are you afraid your parents are going to find out? How long do you think it's going to take? Is it worth the effort? And then, do you want to cry? I think if we go through these immediate responses in I cry, ICRI, I think we have a good starting point for the use of resiliency. Now, Dr. Block had this big, huge scale, and it worked really well. So I think these 6 simple questions, 3 physical, 3 mental aspects, can put you on the right road to resiliency. And I promise you, next time we get into the video here, I'll make sure the camera doesn't keep slipping. For some reason, the camera's slipping tonight. I had to adjust it like twice. But we'll see here now. We can work on some of the aspects of resiliency ourselves. But the point is, when we're in the event or the crisis, that's the time to quickly address the situation, not to fall to pieces, because then we lack that ego control. Ego control, when mixed with resiliency, allows us to determine how much work goes into resiliency later. The more control we have, probably the better the outcome. But sometimes we can't always control that. So if we can't have the ego control over the emotions because of a critical event, then at least be aware of them. So remember this as you go forward, looking at resiliency in your life, taking the aspect of growth. And in that fight or flight moment, remember, you're better than fight or flight. You have that ability to freeze, stop. Am I breathing? Am I bleeding? Can I move? Would my parents be afraid? Would I be afraid if my parents found out? How long is this going to take? Am I that lazy? And do you want to cry? I think those 6 key elements in any event, if you can keep them straight in your head and deal with them in a situation, you'll have a better chance at the resiliency as you pull out of the event. Okay, this is Reverend Mark Tonight with the Collar on the YouTube drop here. Reverend Mark out.